Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets officially introduced Jordi Fernandez as the next head coach of the Nets. We break down his introductory press conference, the key takeaways around what led to him being named the 24th head coach in franchise history, how he sees the future going forward for this young team, and whether or not Nic Claxton is a part of that bright future. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you as always for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started today. And where we get started is with Jordi Fernandez being officially introduced as the 24th head coach in Brooklyn Nets franchise history. Sarah Kustok led the proceedings along with Sean Marks being on hand. A fairly brief introduction. They break off into separate conversations, different reporters speaking with Sean Marks as well. And we'll probably continue to get into those extra aspects of what we can take away from this as we work our way through the rest of this week and into next week. Of course, the offseason looming large for the Brooklyn Nets. But at a high level, we're going to look at what led to the hire for Jordi Fernandez from a Sean Marks perspective, an organizational perspective, why Jordi's excited to be taking on the position, how he feels about this team and the things that he wants to instill in them as he takes over as head coach. And then also key takeaways around Nic Claxton and what his future looks like here, seeming as though the organization is really starting to lean hard into wanting and all but telling you he will be back as a part of this team and pending free agency for him this offseason. But at a very high level, Jordi Fernandez gets introduced, and we're going to blend his and Sean Marks' commentary around how they came to this spot. Obviously, people like Eric Slater doing a great job covering there, along with Brian Lewis from the New York Post. So plenty of different reporters on hand as he was brought in here at the Barclays Center. Extensive a search was conducted, as you would expect Sean Marks to indicate. But from day one, from a Jordi Fernandez perspective, it was about player relationships, looking back over his track record as the Nigerian and Canadian national team coach, something that he'll continue to do this offseason, and that every player and coach from Sean Marks' perspective and from the organization's perspective had nothing but glowing and positive things to say about Jordi Fernandez, the way that he approaches trying to connect with, teach, and grow players, specifically young talent as well, and the idea that he is someone that has a wide-ranging net of resources across the NBA, across the international basketball spectrum to be able to reach out to, connect with, and rely on as he goes along his young head coaching NBA journey. So that's where the organization came into this, right? And I already know when we've seen this, people speculating, was it the right hire, the first hire, the second hire, all that stuff. Listen, stick it in your rear view. Jordi Fernandez is the head coach for the Brooklyn Nets, and there's a lot of reasons to like it. There's a lot of reasons to love it if you're someone who believes that this is a team that should be looking at the core, the young core, and thinking about how to develop and progress over the short and long term. So from a Jordi Fernandez perspective, he mentioned Joe Tsai saying he loves the ownership group here. He also spoke highly of the front office, Sean Marks, management, and having a combined and united vision about what they want to do going forward. Listen, again, you can debate about what your preference is for how this team should proceed going forward. But if the idea is that they want to have short-term goals with long-term stability, then you have to like the idea of hiring Jordi Fernandez and believing that he will grow in this role and be here, as Sean Marks said, intentionally over the long haul. Jordi Fernandez also mentioned, I like the youth. I like the young core because it means that you can grow and build with them, and that helps you have longevity. If you believe that the runway is significant for him to build up to have success with this team, then you have to like having the Cam Thomases of the world, obviously having Noah Clowney come on at the end of the season, obviously having a player like Dariq Whitehead, who was on hand here for the press conference along with Cam Johnson. We know there's injury there honestly, with both players, young, old, veteran, experienced, inexperienced. But Tariq Whitehead there. And then obviously we're going to talk about Nic Claxton as well. Jalen Wilson put into that mix too. So everything about this to me, at least at a very high level, was we believe that we took a big swing. It didn't work out. We were able to get a lot of draft capital back in return. And we now think that we still have, whether pre existing in Cam Thomas or going forward in Noah Clowney, Jalen Wilson, Tariq Whitehead, TBD, we believe that we have players that can be coached up, that can be improved on their skill sets, and can be a part of what we want to do over the long-term future. The other part of this too here, from a Jordi Fernandez, when he was asked what makes him qualified or what does he bring to the table, he first and foremost brought up having the background in sports psychology. He spoke directly to the idea of forming relationships with the players, forming relationships with the staff, forming relationships with every single level of personnel within the organization. And listen, can some of this stuff come off as the cliche phrases that you're going to use as you start your journey? Sure, it can. But to me, it just sounded like this is a guy who believes that everybody needs to be pulling in the same direction. And he put it on his own plate. Obviously, if I am doing my job, Jordi Fernandez said, it's going to make everything easier for everybody else. But being connected, being on the same page, having a vision, and understanding what the goals are for this franchise. Now, he did also say, when do you expect to see results? He said immediately, because the NBA and sports is a results oriented business. So you need to have results happen sooner than later. Listen, on a high level, he said, yes, of course, we want to get back to being a top 10 team on both ends of the floor. Remember, we saw some better offensive results early in the season. Over this past year, we didn't see the type of stability defensively, the type of clamp down ability from a lot of key players, young and veteran alike, that we thought this team was going to be able to hang their hat on from an identity standpoint. So fundamentally, we can think that some of those pieces are there to be successful in these categories. And maybe it's just about instilling better systems, better practices, and having a clearer communication about what expectations are. And he did use the line, listen, I want guys that are putting the team ahead of the self. And if you put the team ahead of the self, then the individual accolades will come, and you expect this team to get better and grow over time. Now, I mentioned again there, talk about having the youth on this team. We want to speak a little bit more to that here coming up, but I also want to touch on things with Sean Marks that go beyond just what the expectations are here for Jordi Fernandez. He was asked after the initial introductory press conference broke out, questions about Ben Simmons, questions about Nic Claxton, so we'll get into that as well. Do I think that this will have an impact on the way they approach this summer and the idea of going star hunting? We'll talk about that as well along the way. But first, got to tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. If you want to make mom smile, start Mother's Day with flowers or a surprise with any of those gifts that you know the brands that she truly loves delivered the very same day with DoorDash. Does mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, or is she a little bit outdoorsy? No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout gear, and so much more. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend 15 plus on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order with promo code Locked On NBA. That's promo code Locked On NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms they do apply. I also need to let you know that I've been told that I have a competitive side. Doug Norrie would tell you it's true. You should see us try to figure out which way we're going to go when we set our joint fantasy lineups across all of these great sport leagues. But the bottom line is, if I do have a competitive side, we know that we all do. And that competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, where you play not only on one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge rent on my iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly, but now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself, and the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in on the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store and on Google Play. All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, we're going to talk about some of the things that Sean Marks also discussed here. He was asked about Ben Simmons. We'll give that update. But by and large, I want to stay centric not only to Jordi Fernandez, but also maybe some of the breadcrumbs that we can kind of pull from here and think about what this offseason is going to look like. There are a couple of key figures in it. And guess what? Yes, Ben Simmons is one of them. The other one, though, is Nic Claxton. So first and foremost, when Fernandez was asked by Eric Slater, have you had an opportunity to connect with the players for the Brooklyn Nets? Paraphrasing a little bit here, I've pretty much talked to everybody, spoke with them on the phone, seen some of them in person already. To me, that's very important. Want to show how organized we're going to be and what our purpose is this summer. We cannot prepare for September in September. We need to start right now. And so far, all of the players have been very excited and great to deal with. So listen, does that feel like a little bit of lip service here as far as, yeah, of course you want to connect with the players? Sure. No expectation. Mentioned Dariq Whitehead was there. Cam Johnson was there. You don't expect every single player to come flooding back from their off season for this introduction. So there's no reason to read the tea leaves on any of that. But you do like the fact that Fernandez is saying, and you would expect this, it's April, end of April, right? But hey, I'm coming in as a rookie head coach. And if I want this thing to go in the right direction, we need to start doing it now. We don't get to start working on it or start having the excuses, right? Go back to the last 27 games from 2 seasons ago after the deadline. Cam Johnson following the year said a lot of different systems players were coming from after the trades, trying to get everybody on the same page. If we have an offseason to really get cohesive, we'll see ourselves turn that corner. Didn't really seem to come to fruition the next year. And for whatever we think Jacque Vaughn was or was not good at as a head coach, that seemed to be a through thread, right? There were sometimes frustrations expressed by Mikal Bridges, Cam Thomas, inconsistent playing time, not knowing what his role was going to be. It sounds like, and we'll pick it apart as we get through it. But if Jordi Fernandez is going to instill his vision for this team, he clearly is going to start doing it today. He's not going to start doing it next week. He's not going to start doing it, 2 days from now. It starts right now, immediately. And I think it's good from a fan perspective, covering the team perspective. Hey, he's pushing away the opportunity for excuses to be made here as they get underway in the next chapter of the franchise. And he's also saying it for the players as well. I have expectations. We understand that's a part of why the Nets liked him as the next head coach here, because he communicates well, he fosters those relationships, and also sets a standard and holds the players accountable to it. So, yes, a little bit fluffy, doesn't mean anything right now at the end of April, but I think listen, as I think Doug said this the other day with Mikal Bridges' exit interview questions. You can do a lot. You can't answer questions perfectly, but you can answer them wrong, right? You can't answer them poorly. And Fernandez did not do that here. He's asserting the idea, the personality, the identity that he wants this team to have. Speaking on connecting with those players, speaking on some of the young talent, and this will flex over into Sean Marks as well. Nic Claxton is obviously going to be one of the key offseason figures for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, we had heard before that Sean Marks, they want to make him a priority. They hope that he can be kept here long term. But when Jordi Fernandez was asked about him, and I believe, I don't know if it was Eric Slater or someone else in the reporter pool that did mention over on X, this came from a PR department question. So this is the Brooklyn Nets wanting to put this in front of Jordi Fernandez to respond to. When he was asked about Nic Claxton, paraphrasing, he'll be Defensive Player of the Year in short order. We love, even though you may list him at a 5, it's the defensive versatility that he brings that is so valuable. And on the offensive end, the dribble handoffs, being able to help set up the offense in different ways. He's a critical piece of what we want to do going forward. That's it, man. As far as I'm concerned, combined with wanting him to be here from Sean Marks, you're always going to leave a little bit of wiggle room. But I don't think Jordi Fernandez gets up there in front of the microphone and speaks that highly of and with that much conviction about what he means to the Nets going forward about Nic Claxton, unless there's some real weight behind it from the organization that they're going to get this job done. Now, what does that look like from a monetary standpoint? We've seen the Nets. They gave out some contracts last offseason to Cam Johnson. At first, you thought not terrible, not great. Then the performance doesn't quite get there. I think one of the things specifically when it comes to Nic Claxton is he's been around this organization a long time. We know that he had a slow build up getting into a bigger and bigger role for this team. And he does feel slightly separated, even from Cam Thomas, and especially from the younger players like Noah Clowney, like a Jalen Wilson. But he's still young. He can be 25 years old. And if you believe that the Nets have done a poor job with who they've had at the helm for this team from a head coaching standpoint. Let's leave Sean Marks and the front office off the table for right now. But if you believe they had poor coaching in place, or certainly not the best possible coaching, then I believe we can still look at Nic Claxton and say there is another level to his game that can be tapped into here. And again, cohesion, building an identity, having an understanding of roles, expectations, those things really matter here to me. And it sounds like Nic Claxton is going to be a part of the young core that Jordi Fernandez is excited to have in place so that he has a long run and a long-term future building up with these players. The other thing here then too, if we turn our attention a little bit over to Sean Marks here, because he had some commentary about where his expectations lie on a couple of different people. Let's just hit the Ben Simmons one here quickly, because it does tie back to Jordi Fernandez and his vision for this team, specifically that, yes, he wants it to be fast paced, right? Mentioned top 10 at both ends of the floor. Sure, we love you to be a top 10 team. That probably means you're a playoff team, right? So let's turn that corner. But the identity of how you get there, we hate to say it, and we're not going to go too much into the weeds here, but obviously a healthy Ben Simmons can help in that category. Whether or not that's a realistic, viable avenue that you want to invest your energy in, hey, TBD. But Sean Marks, when asked about Ben Simmons and training camp, the expectations are certainly for him to be ready. And again, classic, right? Expectations. There should be no reason for him not to be. There should be no reason. Expectations should be. The doctors and the therapist have told us that he should be ready to go next season. Again, it's going to be on Ben's timeline. We're going to have to see how he progresses through the summer. Very unfortunate injury. I thought we saw glimpses of how he could play last year. We looked like a completely different team when he was out there and healthy. So for his benefit, we hope he's out there and healthy, let alone our own reasons why, right? So from a Ben Simmons standpoint, you just want to see, and we've said this before, you want to see him be healthy. Doesn't matter if it's for the Brooklyn Nets or for any other team in the league. You want to see an NBA talent be healthy and capable of playing. That was the update on him. They also dropped in the Dariq Whitehead, which has been said before, is expected to be fully ready for the summer and for training camp and everything else. So you have this other young talent. What that all means in the grand scheme when it comes to the vision for Jordi Fernandez, specifically to Ben Simmons, we'll see. But we said for a long time here, at a minimum, he's going to be in this room. So if you're thinking about, and we'll talk about Cam Thomas here too. If you're thinking about Cam Thomas, you're thinking about Nic Claxton, you're thinking about Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead. That's five still young players. And Ben Simmons is still a little bit on the younger side than some of the veterans on this team. Would be 26, 27. So he still falls a little bit below that mark. Obviously, I don't consider him to be a part of the long-term future. But how does Jordi Fernandez navigate having Ben Simmons on this roster if he ends up being healthy, and the way that you're going to combine these players on the court, right? Because we don't believe that you can have Nic Claxton and Ben Simmons living together. We have seen that Noah Clowney and Nic Claxton can live together. So how do you compartmentalize that? And how do you value the youth on this team and making sure that that core continues to develop and grow together and not be short-sighted by money that is allocated to players or by the glimpses, as Sean Marks mentioned, of what a player could be or what the team could be with that player. It's about healthy bodies, young bodies, progressing and growing this team going forward. Coming up here in a moment, we'll also talk about if this indicated anything to us about the offseason and the pursuit of stars specifically now, this summer, and if it has any impact on veteran players across this team. First, though, got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. You know it is playoff time in the NBA and the NHL, and also MLB is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks. Cover the spectrum of all the different sports there. You see what that is? All on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Also going to let you know that this next segment is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let it out, especially to someone who's unbiased to your life. You know that you can be, whether I've mentioned before, big moves, job changes, life changes, sometimes losing loved ones. All of these things create different emotions and a spectrum of things you try to process through. And it's just better to go ahead and give yourself an opportunity to speak with someone who independently can help you navigate through that. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than whether or not the Brooklyn Nets made the playoffs or going on deep runs. It's about your life and real things that matter to the core of you day to day. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, you need to give BetterHelp a try. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. All right, so as we tie a bow on this Locked On Nets episode, obviously Jordi Fernandez introduced as the 24th head coach in Brooklyn Nets franchise history. Coincidence that he's number 24? Cam Thomas wears number 24? Hey, I'm talking about drawing some parallels here and trying to see some tea leaves that really make it interesting for the Nets in this upcoming season. Now, before we talk about this summer and what it means, one other note when it came to not who Jordi Fernandez specifically spoke to in his introductory comments, but just like Sean Marks mentioned Ben Simmons, we also hear what he had to say about one Cam Thomas. And because he obviously is not only a player that finally got a chance and really showcased himself this past season in an expanded and more consistent, if not always consistent role, he also is a young player. He also will be extension eligible. Whether or not that comes to pass, that's actually a whole other episode that you should come back for about his eligibility for that, what the Nets should do, how they could communicate with him as they work their way through this offseason. I have to give Cam Thomas credit. This is from Sean Marks, a lot of credit. The bucket getter that he's sort of known as, he can do that. He's got that confidence, but I think you can see how his game has changed. He's working on his game over the course of last year, trying to make other people better, how he can find other people out there. He's become a little bit more of a facilitator, more of a playmaker, and on the defensive side, he's giving effort. You see him in there scrapping for loose balls. You see him in there getting defensive rebounds. So you got to give him a lot of credit because he is working on facets of his game that maybe in the past he hasn't worked on that much, hasn't had to work on, I should say. This it's a classic both and, right? So finally, though, again, whether or not we think that he should have been playing all along from day one, the era through Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, he finally gets to see the court. Here he is now, right? And rather than it be, and you did hear this from going back to Jacques Vaughn, right? Hey, we need to see him do certain things. He needs to work on certain facets of his game. We need to see more from him. And we highlighted throughout the course of the season. It really did grow and expand. We don't need Cam Thomas to be a defensive stalwart. We do need him to be a guy that has a nose for some rebounds, especially when you have Nic Claxton, now Noah Clowney, when you have Dorian Finney-Smith, at least this past season, Day'Ron Sharpe, right? When you have those bigger bodies out there that are helping box out and battle off some of the opposition, you need to be that backcourt player that grabs those rebounds, that helps set other players, that goes through some learning curves around blitzing defenses and identifies those quick outlet passes. So it's mostly all glowing. It still falls into this weird bucket when we talk about the offseason and what the Nets are going to do. I don't know. Is it fully entrenched that he is a part of the young core that Jordi Fernandez is speaking to and that Sean Marks wants to see grow over time? I think so. I think it should be, but will it be, right? So there's still a little bit there, though. Big compliments from Sean Marks. I know some fans are going to say, yeah, well, it's your own fault, Sean. You had this edict set up where he could not, Cam Thomas, go out there and learn on the fly and get the live game reps with consistency. You had to have him grind through it for 2 years before he finally got his chance. By whatever method, you now again have a coach in place that they believe is going to communicate, set expectations, and get the most out of all of these young players. And I think, we hope, we believe that Cam Thomas is a part of that. So the last note here for me is we'll hear more about expectations for Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, all this other stuff. But Doug and I have been pretty consistent about the idea that going into this offseason, the Nets are going to go star hunting would seem to be a bit misguided. Not only because what is the list, right? How many players are really going to shake free? Also the cost, and then also the long-term perspective. Right now, the Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm recording this as of Wednesday night. So, they're leading their series against Orlando. It looks like they're going to move on, but they're going to play Boston. And I had the interesting thought the other day about, What do they need to accomplish against Boston for Donovan Mitchell to say, hey, this is a viable place for me to compete at a high level for championships? Is that going 7 games, beating Boston? That's a lofty goal. Going 6 games, playing really close. Whatever the metric is there something that this team can do around him where it's going to become less likely that he's going to be traded this offseason? Or that the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to say, we're at least going to ride it out a little bit longer and we'll revisit it at the trade deadline if that's what we need to do. And maybe that's a conversation that we will have at that point. And we're going to expand on this narrative when I got Doug and I back together here finally, as we've had CJ Holmes. Excellent conversation that Doug had with CJ Holmes. Go check that episode out, please, if you did not, from yesterday on YouTube on the podcast feed. But the way that Jordi Fernandez spoke just seemed to me, and we said this at the time of the hire, right? You could go veteran coach like Coach Bud. If you thought it was going to win now time, you want to turn this thing around immediately. We thought this was a longer term view hire. Everything that Jordi Fernandez said in this press conference seemed to be the indication of it's not just about right now. It's about the next 2-3 years. And when you think about all of the draft capital and you watch the way the Phoenix Suns look right now, you start to think about how much more young talent can continue to come in the door, or how when the really, truly elite of the elite superstar maybe shakes free, you'll be ready with these high leverage, valuable assets to go get them. It just feels like we're at a place here where full off season, full year ahead for Jordi Fernandez to instill what he wants this team to be. He mentioned the Brooklyn way. So yes, he is 100% on board with the culture identity that once upon a time existed for Joe Tsai, Sean Marks, and the Brooklyn Nets. It just feels like you're going to want to go ahead and not hold your breath waiting for a Donovan Mitchell trade to happen this offseason. Doesn't mean it precludes it, because Sean Marks still said attractive for superstars. We know that we can do that. But again, everything about this just has young vibes, building for the future, long-term stability. If I failed to mention at the top, long-term stability being a key thing that Jordi Fernandez wants and that the organization wants. That means no more. If you're going to swing big, it needs to be even more of a concrete home run than maybe taking some volatile looks at players that, again, things in and out of your control, doesn't matter. But if you're going to make the big decisions like that, it needs to feel like underneath it, you still have the ability to develop young talent, set a strong baseline, and never find yourself in the situation they did this past season, muddling, dealing with injuries, a lot of question marks around a lot of key players, maybe evaluations of talents being a little bit off the mark. So they want to get back to their core identity, I think. And Jordi Fernandez seems to represent that as the head coach for the Brooklyn Nets going forward. That being the case, we want to talk about, as the offseason, the playoffs roll along here, Cam Thomas contract extension, whether or not Doug agrees with me on the star hunting lack of nature around this offseason. That's a word and a phrase that you would use, and a lot of other narratives, right? Nic Claxton. I do have something else that we want to get into here this offseason too. What's the margin player? I've been thinking about this watching Jalen Brunson with the Knicks. Who's the guy that you buy low on, and then he comes in and absolutely crushes it? We're going to talk about that and this offseason ahead as well. How will re-signing Nic Claxton potentially impact other decisions that they make around this roster? So didn't want to go a mile deep, but obviously a lot of positives here, a lot of interesting narratives to start to pull on as we work our way through the NBA playoffs and the Brooklyn Nets offseason. Until then, though, you get over to YouTube at Locked On Nets, you subscribe, you turn on the alerts. You go over, get your podcast needs fulfilled. You give 5 stars wherever possible. You share it with the people that you love and care about the most. And as we always know, with no Doug Norrie, there is no quote, short of saying that I miss my friend. And I can't wait until he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball, 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 yeah.